Well, good morning, everyone. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting just yet, my name is Ruben, and I'm one of the youth pastors here. I get the privilege and honor of leading our teenagers, and I'm excited to speak with you this morning. I love my teenagers, but I'm excited to speak in an environment where it doesn't smell like a mixture of body odor, Cool Ranch Doritos, and pumpkin spice. So we're all already off to a great start. I want to let you know that I did not grow up in a Christian household. I grew up in a semi-Christian household. Now, I don't know if that's a politically correct term, but let me explain. My parents accepted Jesus when I was about 10 years old, and I didn't accept him until I was 17. That's another story. But even though my parents accepted him at a later time and a later age, they very quickly became what we call super spiritual parents. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I'm now living in a super spiritual home with super spiritual house rules. When it came to church on Sunday mornings, oh man, I didn't have a choice. I did have a choice. I would either go to church or die. And the funeral would be held at the church. So either way, I'm going to church. And even growing up, I was already an awkward little boy. It didn't help that my first slow dance was with my mom to the song, "Our God is an Awesome God." That was extremely excruciating. And with my mom growing up, she would pack me my lunches in brown paper bags for school. But here's the thing, she would write these notes and then put a Bible verse underneath. But here's the thing, half the verses didn't even make any sense. It'd be, "Have a great day, son," Jeremiah 13:2. Do you know what Jeremiah 13:2 says? It says, "I got a girdle according to God and put it on my loins." Thanks, Mom. Wow. Days of fish have been blessed. Praise Jesus. Here I am, eating my sandwich at lunchtime, thinking about loins and girdling. Ooh. My dad refused to get an iPhone for the longest time because he believed that the Apple logo was a sign of the forbidden fruit, and it was the end times as we know it. Unbelievable. It's a picture. People think, "Ruben, you're so weird." This is why. But in any classic Christian household, there is a common denominator is what you have hanging on a wall. The wall hangings. That's what gets you. And if you've grown up in a traditional Christian household at all, maybe you know of a couple of things that are hanging in your wall as we speak, actually. Number one, the footprints on the sand poem. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah. I'm a full-grown adult most times, and I still get emotional over it. The second one is the classic 1 Corinthians passage. The love is patient, love is kind, it's not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. Does that sound amazing? It sounds so nice. It's a section of words, that 1 Corinthians passage, it's always been there. It's a type of vocabulary that's just been thrown around now. We use it in weddings, in vows and special occasions, maybe on your first date. I don't know. Actually, if you use it on your first date, please run. But I'm not saying all these instances are bad. What I'm saying is that if we're not careful, this becomes very elementary. And it's not. Back when I was a kid, I had it memorized, or it was on a picture frame. But if you look deeper into this piece of the Bible, it has a lot of layers. It can be very complicated, and it can actually mess with your lifestyle. For us, as we read this today, it's aw, super cute, adorable. But back when it was written in that day, it was actually very countercultural, and it flipped the early church world upside down. And if you don't know where we're reading in the Bible, it's a portion of words that is written in a letter to a church in the city of Corinth, the Corinthians. And it's a capital city, and as we know about a capital city, it's full of resources and wealth, and it's now getting to their head. This church, this Corinthian church, is now getting messed up. It is full of divisions, it's full of legalism, and now their concept, the view on the concept of love is now getting distorted. The Corinthian people's view on love can now be summarized into 3 simple points. The Corinthian people believe that 1, love can be purchased. 2, that love is about yourself. And that 3, love can be found in inanimate objects. So as you can see, Paul is walking to the room, assessing the situation and thinking, what is going on here? Do you not know that love cannot be bought? That is not just about yourself and it's not about the things around you. I will show you, I will explain to you what true love really is. And so he starts educating them. He's saying to the Corinthian church, pay attention because this is so crucial. No one will get a proper understanding of who Jesus is because you don't even know him yourself. Love is the essence of all. Love will point people towards Jesus. Even Jesus says himself that people will get a glimpse of me based on how you love one another. So what's he saying here? He's saying love connects all the dots. As he opens up this passage in chapter 13, he says, listen, even if I could hear the words from heaven, but I don't love other people, I'm like a clanging cymbal. I'm just noise. It's useless. If I could understand all of God's plans, all of his understandings, but I don't love other people, what good is it? So this word love, this idea of love, it is so layered, it has so many levels. And that is why we're breaking down this word week by week throughout the course of the summer for you to help you and myself actually understand this concept better and see who God is throughout it all. So if you're just joining us this morning, first, welcome, so glad you're here. We are camped in these verses for the course of the summer in a series called Copycat. But this is what the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. It says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, and it always perseveres. So this morning, I love to unpack a section of the text, and it is, love is not self-seeking. Love is not self-seeking. In other words, love does not demand its own way. In other words, putting others first, and the concept of generosity. We don't naturally default to this. Let's be real. Maybe there's some times, like maybe spaces like this, where we get moments of clarity, like, oh yes, speaker's talking, I should be more generous, I should work on that. But because of our natural human tendencies, we tend to drift towards our default, again, where we're actually not so incredibly generous. Let's be real, it's a fact. Very few of us will wake up in the morning thinking, how can I help someone else today? How could I extend my love and service and sacrifice and not think about myself for one moment today? Maybe our lead pastor, Phil, because he's perfect. But for me, I certainly don't. Love, which is embodied in God's nature, he's painting a picture for us, illustrating to us that if we want to imitate or copycat, see what I did there? Jesus, then putting others first and the concept of generosity is something to think about. Putting others first requires you to position yourself lower than other people. But get this, listen very carefully. By submitting yourself to the people around you, you actually also elevate God's work around you. I'll say that again, because this is important. By submitting yourself to the people around you, you also elevate God's work around you. So, there's a show that I used to love watching, and it's called Undercover Boss. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, or have seen it before, or if it still exists. It's a show. Every episode is a different organization, and what they do is they take a CEO of a company and they actually bring him down to the lower levels and do all the grunt work. And so if you just take an episode and a CEO of a sanitation company, for example, his or her wardrobe is just full of suits and ties, and that's what they're used to wearing. They would all of a sudden become down to the lowest levels and like wear overalls and masks and stuff like that and work in the dirty wastes and stuff like that. It's quite entertaining. And in that show, in the episode, they would meet people along the front lines who were doing the dirty work with them. And then at the end of the episode, the CEO would reveal themselves as the CEO as a surprise and a shock to those workers. And he or she would give them rewards and vacation and money based on just how hard they were working. I don't know about you, but this show shows just such a great picture of the topic this morning that we're just chatting about. That if you may, Jesus, the CEO of heaven, coming down to this dusty, broken, frail world, this God, Savior of the world, leaving his proper seat in heaven, coming down to position himself lower than us and to serve us and to put us forward. This is the good news. This is the greatest love story ever told. And Jesus illustrates it perfectly. So follow me on this one. If this whole Christianity thing is true, if Jesus is more than a teacher but truly God, and if Jesus role model by putting others first in such a simple and obvious way, and if a Christian is essentially a Jesus follower, then I would propose that copycatting him in putting others before us would be an extremely important aspect in our Jesus-based life journey, huh? That if it's true that people would see who Jesus is by how we love one another, then I would believe living a life that's not self-seeking would be extremely important and should be a priority in our day-to-day living, don't you think? It says it's so clear in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Listen to this. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others better than yourselves. Listen carefully to this. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. That's so fascinating. Every time I read this, I feel like something jumps out at me every single time. And in my most recent reading, this came out. It says, don't look only to your own interests, meaning that God is okay with you looking out for your own interests. God is okay with that. But the problem stops. The problem comes when it stops with you. See, God's love that is shown to you is actually also meant to go through you. We see it throughout the course of the entire Bible, that when God blesses a certain individual, he will mention, I will bless you so that I can bless others. So I'm pretty sure that God is okay with you looking out for yourself. I'm pretty sure God is A-okay with you taking a vacation with your family or buying nice things. But at the same time, I also believe that anything in your hands, or anything in your bank account, or any talents or gifts that God has blessed you with is also meant to be leveraged to benefit other people and do incredible work in God's bigger picture. See, at this church, you're not going to hear a poverty gospel where you need to get rid of absolutely everything and go all Amish and just churn butter for Jesus. But at the same time, you're not going to hear a prosperity gospel where, like, if you accept Jesus, he's going to make it rain so much in your bank account, you'll use dollar bills as Kleenex. What you will hear is a generosity gospel, that when you get blessed by God, you enjoy the blessings, you savor the moments, but you also leverage it to benefit other people, to love other people, so that God's kingdom would be expanded. I, for one, would not want to be that person that's so self-conceited with God's blessings that it just stops with me, when it's also meant to go feed the hungry and clothe the naked and help the needy. There's this man named James Harrison. And he's a man from Australia, and he's nicknamed the man with the golden arm. And I love his story. At a young age, he found out that in his blood, he contained something called anti-D immune globulin. Anti-D immune globulin. I have to practice that word before saying it to you guys. Do you know what it is? Because I don't. I had to research it. What it is, basically, it's an antibody that's used in a cure for Rhesus disease. Now, if you don't know what Rhesus disease is, it's a disease that targets pregnant women. It's an illness and a sickness that targets and destroys the baby's blood cells in its mother's womb. It's tragic. This man has a cure for it. And so when he found that out, over the course of his life, get this, he donated blood exactly 1,000 times. He's donated blood 1,000 times. And even better, through the process of his donations, through medicine and research, they were able to save 2 million babies. 2 million babies. And even better, including his own 2 grandchildren that's illustrated in a picture. It's a heartwarming story. It's great. It gets you motivated. It's inspiring. Let's be real. This would be a very disappointing circumstance if he found out he had the cure but didn't do anything about it, huh? Be a shame. He used the power that was in his blood to benefit other people by giving his blood. And everything we have has a benefit towards other people as well. So in the same case in our lives, we can leverage the power we have in many things to give those things away to benefit other people. So the Corinthian church here is full of resources, full of wealth, full of talent. Paul is looking at them thinking, wow, there's so much potential here, but your proper view is getting very distorted. You're just thinking about yourselves. You're hoarding everything for yourself. Here's your far-fetched thought. I believe that God can bring good out of good. Now, usually, a lot of us would get more excited when the pastor's like, God can bring good out of bad. God can bring good out of your hardships and your trials and your marriage problems and your adversities. And I believe that. I believe that 100%. But I wonder if we would be so quick to respond to the opposite as well. Like, why do we get so many good responses when we hear, speakers saying, God can bring good out of bad, but we tend to get a little more quiet when we hear that God can bring good out of good? I'll tell you why. It's because we want God to have all our suffering, but we want to keep all our blessings. It's a tough pill to swallow. And we don't necessarily say that out loud, but it's often how we treat it. Why do we rush to God in times of crisis, but when we're in blessings, we're so reluctant to think about leveraging it to others? So, when God blesses you with something, whether it is finances or talents, gifts, or maybe even time, that's an immune globulin in your blood. When Paul is talking about being self-seeking, he's also talking about a form of spiritual pride, which we've touched on this in the past in the summer. And this church that Paul is talking to is suffering from it because this form of spiritual pride, being self-seeking, it falsely promises 3 things. 1, it promises, apparently, self-sufficiency. The I've got this mentality. I don't need anyone else. I have it all together. I am a good person. Second thing is self-importance. The I'm valuable mentality. I live in the right neighborhood. Hope City serve team couldn't run without me. I have the right label on my purse. I don't know. I don't have a purse. Number 3 is self-exaltation. The I'm better mentality. Everyone, look at me. Tell me how I'm great. The problem with that is that we're so full of ourselves. And if we're so full of ourselves, then there's no room for God at all. The church that Paul is writing to is just so used to getting to the motions. They're now going through this vicious cycle of thinking that the church runs on them and them alone. And what was once a time where they were bowing down to Jesus' feet, now they're bowing down to their own altar. And now they can't see Jesus anymore because they're in the way. But when we empty ourselves, we are in a perfect position to be, 1, filled with God, and 2, be used by God. I'll say that again because it's so key. When we empty ourselves, we are in a perfect position to be filled with God and be used by God. So, how do we combat pride and selfishness? Well, as I mentioned before, the opposite of it is putting others first and generosity. But why generosity? And so as we kind of land this plane this morning, I just want to leave you with two simple thoughts. Number one, generosity and putting others first resembles the heart of God. It resembles the heart of God. When we give not only to ourselves, but also to others, we are actually tapping into the nature of our God. Our God doesn't just give enough, he gives more than enough. Consider one of the most famous passages in the Bible, dare I even say the most pivotal verse in all of Christianity. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his son, his one and only son. Notice something, that generosity is actually the foundation of our salvation. Generosity is the foundation of our salvation. What are we doing here? Why are we coming together? We're living a life for Jesus because we accepted him into our hearts, knowing that we received a gift that's too good to be true. And the bedrock of this concept is generosity itself. So, because God loved us, he gave to us. There's this famous French writer named Victor Hugo. He says this line that I absolutely love. It's pretty popular. Maybe you've heard it. He says, you can give without love, but you cannot love without giving. I love that. Like when you love something, you will give towards it. You will show generosity towards it. Parents in the room, you love your kids, and you will give the world for them. You love your houses and your cars, and you will spend money to make it look pretty and renovate it and all of these things. When you love something, you give towards it. God isn't to give in because God is love. And since God is love, God also gives. And we get the privilege of role modeling that. The Apostle Paul challenged his church in Ephesus, a different city, to not love according to his or her standards, but according to the standard of God. His challenge for them it's just a great challenge for us today as well. This is what it says in Ephesians chapter 5. It says this, imitate God in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love. Follow the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Another word for imitate is copy. Copycat. We are to copy the behavior of God. And one of the most practical ways for us to do so is to practice being generous. Every time we give, we look a little bit more like our Heavenly Father. Whenever we're generous, we actually bring down a piece of heaven down to earth. We look forward to heaven, right? But as Christians, as Jesus followers, we didn't just accept him into our lives just to get to heaven after we die, but also to see heaven on earth while we live. Finally, the second thing is generosity and putting others first is the reasonable response to the gospel. Putting others first is the reasonable response to the gospel. When we discover the true gospel, that when Jesus came and took everything that we deserved so we can get everything he deserved, it leaves us with this overwhelming sense of gratitude. I know as humans, we tend to go through a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings, but the number one emotion that every Christian should strive for is thankfulness. We understand that everything we have is a gift. It really is a gift. And when we understand that, we know that we don't have to give. We get to give. I love the story in Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. It's about a man who is a corrupt tax collector who's actually stealing from his own people. And one day Jesus comes passing by while Zacchaeus is just hanging on a tree. Apparently that's what you do. And he calls him out by name, and he invites himself over for a meal at his home. Zacchaeus, as a chief tax collector, probably earned his reputation and his status over a course of how many years? Being a chief tax collector, that's like 5, 10, 20 years worth of work. But then all of a sudden, in one moment with Jesus, everything changes. His life flips upside down. He becomes a follower of him. And notice the first thing he does. It says this in Luke. It says, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, my God, I would give half my wealth to the poor. And if I've cheated on people on their taxes, I will give them 4 times as much. So after Zacchaeus encounters the gospel, his first response was to give. And not only give, he decided to give 4 times the amount to the people he cheated. Now we know when we accepted Jesus into our life that we get a clean slate. But no one told him to go back and repay the people he's cheated. No one told him to give away half of his estate. Yet the gospel, yet this story goes deeper and beyond our minds can even comprehend. When we encounter grace, our heart is transformed. Literally transformed. Jesus filled us up in order to spill us out. Jesus filled us up in order to spill us out. We are blessed in order to be a blessing to other people. And we need to live in a way that God can use our lives to bless others. And as we bless others, we can't help but be blessed ourselves. So, as we wrap up this morning, how do we live a life that puts others first? Well, living a life for yourself is about our glory, my glory. But living a life putting others first and being generous is about God's glory. So to ask the question, anything you do, ponder this thought. Is this for my glory or is it for God's glory? How can I enjoy God's blessings in my life, but also leverage it to other people as well? If it's money, maybe it's simply paying it forward, meeting a need. Maybe it's paying it backwards, paying for a drive-through. I don't know. If it's your talents or gifts, hey, here's a crazy thought. Join the Hope City Serve team. Put that talent just to amazing use. And if it's time, what kind of needs are around you? How can you put others first? Maybe it's helping someone move. Maybe it's helping with a grocery trip. I don't know. But I do know this. As I mentioned before, generosity is a foundation of our salvation. And how are we to copycat Jesus in that manner? It's a great challenge for myself even. So, if you're here and you don't really consider yourself a Jesus follower, first off, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming to check us out. Whether you were invited by a friend or came alone or you just saw cop cars outside the road and thought, hey, this must be a happening place. It is, isn't it? Cool lights. Maybe this talk made you think a little bit and got you a little bit curious. And maybe you have some questions. Maybe you're considering something bigger than yourself. And we would love to help you walk through that process. And if you're pondering anything, have any questions or curious about this message or just the concept of Jesus and the Bible and his love and the gospel, and I would encourage you, text life. Text life to 555-888. And when you do this, we're not going to come to your house and spam you with Bibles. What you are going to get is a digital booklet that just explains the basics of our faith. And essentially just puts the ball in your court that if you want to further talk about it, then we are more than happy to walk with you through the process. Thanks for coming this morning on this long weekend. I'm so glad you're here and we get to hang out together. As we close this morning, I would love to invite you to stand with me, and I would love to pray for you as we dismiss. Jesus, thank you so much for this incredible morning and our church. Thank you that your word is not just this old dusty story, but it is real and relevant and still applicable to our lives in 2019. I pray, God, that we would take the word and whether we've taken notes or just mentally hear the message, that we would not just leave it here, but that we would actually put into practice this upcoming week. If it is true that people will get to see your face by how we love one another, then I pray that you would just remind us and challenge us to practice generosity and put other people first. I pray a blessing upon everyone here this morning. I pray that as we leave, that you would be in the midst of our conversations and laughters and hangouts. God, I pray for protection over everyone here, physically, on their minds, and on their souls. And so, Jesus, I thank you that for this church. I thank you for what you're doing in our church community. And I pray, Lord, that you would not stop working and continue to grow this church. Thankful for this church family, and I just pray a blessing upon everyone here this morning. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Before you go, if you are in need of prayer, if you want to talk to a pastor, then we have a couple available on this side of the stage. Come, and they would love to pray for you. If you are heading out, thanks for coming. Have a great rest of the weekend. We'll see you next week.